Welcome to Chapter 5. After reading Chapter 5 and listening to the lecture, you should be able to answer the following focus questions. Why is educational history important? What were teaching in schools like in the American colonies, 1620 to 1750? What were the goals of education during the Revolutionary period, 1750 to 1820? How was the struggle won for state-supported common schools 1820 to 1865? Understanding education history is important for the following reasons. Knowledge of events that influence schools will help in the evaluation of current proposals for change. Awareness of events that have influenced teaching is a hallmark of professionalism in the field. European antecedents of American education from ancient Greek include Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. American education is also influenced by ancient Rome, which was influenced by the Greeks. In addition, ancient Rome has a strong influence on today's elementary and secondary systems. Teaching in schools between the years 1620 and 1750 placed an emphasis on the following. Curriculum, or the essentialist, focused on reading, writing, and math based on religion. Teacher status during this time was low. There were minimal qualifications for teaching, and there was a focus on high morals of teachers. Schools took a Puritan rule approach, which is described as harsh schools that taught reading and writing to learn scripture. The following types of schools were available: parochial, or schools based on religious beliefs; dame, or schools for initial instruction for reading, writing, and arithmetic for boys, and only schools for girls; reading and writing, or schools for boys beyond what parents could teach; Latin grammar schools, or schools for boys to prep for Harvard. African American students received training from masters or school church groups. Examples included the Philadelphia African School. Native Americans received their education from Quaker Indian schools. Several origins of mandated education acts were developed between 1620 and 1750, including the following. Massachusetts Act of 1642, or the first educational law in the country, declared children's needed to read and write. If parents were not able to ensure they could receive a fine. Massachusetts Act of 1647, or the old Duluth-Satan Act, which mandated the establishment of support of schools. The goals of education between 1750 and 1820 included some of the following. Ben Franklin started the Philadelphia Academy, a secular academic supported privately, and wrote relating to the education of youth in Pennsylvania. Sarah Pierce started Sarah Pierce's Female Academy, which emphasized essentialist curriculum. Female seminaries were developed, including the Troy Seminary, which was one of the first women's colleges. Thomas Jefferson viewed the education of the common people most effective means of preserving liberty. He stated that for a society to remain free, it must support a continuous system of public education. He also created a bill for the moral general diffusion of knowledge, which called for state-controlled schools that would teach at no cost to parents 3 years of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Webster's Speller was written by Noah Webster. The old blueback purpose was to install first rudimentary of language and some ideas of religion, moral, and domestic economy. Common schools were state-supported high schools. They were favored by city residents, non-tax payers, democratic leaders, philanthropists, and humanitarians. Common schools were opposed by rural residents, taxpayers, aristocratic and conservative groups, private school owners, conservative religious groups, Southerners, and non-English speaking groups. Horace Mann is considered a champion of the common school movement, which provided free public local schools. Common schools improved Massachusetts schools. They provided convinced conservation-moneyed classes that ensured that free schools were the cheapest means of self-protection and insurance. Mann also started normal schools, which provided general knowledge courses and courses in pedagogy for teacher preparation. The McGuffey Reader was written by Reverend Williams Holmes McGuffey. The readers emphasized virtues of hard work, honesty, truth, charity, and obedience. The Moral Land Grant Act provided federal land for states to either sell or rent for funds for the establishment of colleges of agricultural and mechanical arts. Compulsory education laws required common school attendance and scientific management. They used a top-down management that was taken from big businesses. During this time, the American education, the first kindergarten, was established. The Freedmen's Bureau was established after the Civil War to provide foundations for education for former slaves. Booker T. Washington had a great influence on the higher education of African Americans. He founded the Tuskegee Institute, which was an industrial school for African Americans in rural Alabama. Booker T. Washington believed that as a race grows in knowledge, experience, culture, taste, and wealth, that the want of the people will become more diverse, and to satisfy the number of professional businessmen and women will increase. W.E.B. Du Bois was the first African American awarded a doctorate of philosophy. He founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, which called America to educate the most talented tenth of the African American population to equip them for leadership. Between 1865 and 1920, there was a movement for the professionalization of teaching. During this time, the following occurred. Professional teacher organizations were started. The National Education Association, NEA, and the American Federation of Teachers, AFTA, were created. Both worked to increase teacher salaries and professionalizing teaching. The Committee of 10, funded by NEA, was created, and it decided the primary function of high schools to take intellectually elite students and prepare them for life. It stressed the mental discipline in humanities, languages, and science. The Committee of 15 was created by the NEA, where the appointed committee examined elementary curriculum. From this examination, Latin, modern languages, and algebra were added into the curriculum. The concept of compulsory education also stated that the elementary curriculum should be organized around five subjects: grammar, literature, arithmetic, geography, and history. The reorganization of secondary education called for a high school curriculum to accommodate individual instruction. It was determined that schools should focus on 7 goals: health, command of individual processes, worthy home membership, vocation, citizenship, worthy use of leisure time, and ethical character. Women's influence on teaching is very evident in the number of women who entered the teaching force between 1865 and 1920 due to the increased demand for teachers. During this time, schools were linked with social service agencies and institutions. The Progressive Era occurred between the period of 1920 and 1945, in which the philosophy of progressivism was introduced into schools. Progressivism states that education should focus on children's interests and practical needs, and teachers serve as guides. Progressivism is hallmarked by the opening of John Dewey's Laboratory School, which gave students meaningful, relevant education, test principles, and stated that curriculum should be a natural outgrowth of children's interest. During this period, Maria Montessori's method was introduced. Montessori believed children's mental, physical, and spiritual development should be enhanced by providing them with developmentally appropriate activities. In Montessori schools, teachers created learning environments based on students' level of development and readiness to learn new material. The decline in progressivism was due to public criticism. Despite the decline, progressivism has had a lasting effect on the educational system, including the continued use of the following: inquiry and discovery learning, self-paced instructional approaches, field trips, flexible scheduling, open concept classrooms, non-graded schools, small group activities, school-based counseling. Between the 1920s and 1945, there was a focus on educating immigrants and minorities. The goal was the rapid assimilation into English-speaking Anglo-European society. During this time, children were often punished for speaking their native language. As a result, ethnic groups established separate schools to preserve culture. The federal government placed Native American tribes on reservations and tribal children in boarding schools to assimilate them into the dominant culture. Mary McLeod Benoist started what became the Benoist-Cookman College and directed the Office of Minority Affairs in the National Youth Administration. World War II and the federal government influences on education include the creation of the Land of Thatch, which provided funding for worker training, construction of school in military areas, child care for working parents. Lastly, the GI Bill of Rights was created during this time and provided funding for tuition and boarding at colleges and universities for veterans. As we move into the post-war era, the following things occurred. During the 1950s, the following occurred or was created. The National Defense Education Act of 1958 started in response to the Russian satellite Sputnik, which was the first into space. Education is on the first line of defense. New math, science, and social studies and foreign language programs. School desegregation. Brown versus the education of Topeka. The concept of separation is unequal. Schools order to desegregate. During the 1960s, the following occurred or was created. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which allocated funds on the basis of the number of poor children. Title VII, the Bilingual Act, provided federal aid to low-income children with limited English-speaking ability. During the 1980s, the following occurred or was created. Nation at Risk gave evidence that schools were failing. The Pay Data proposal, which was a response to the Nation at Risk. Proposal for perennial core curriculum. High School, a report on secondary education in America, suggested strengthening America's core curriculum. And during the 1900s, the following occurred or was created. Greater challenges related to increased student diversity, greater international competition, less support for public education, the decentralization and deregulation of school, and the development of teacher leadership and collaboration. Educational priorities of the new century include the following: equity for all students, reducing the achievement gap. School excellence was influenced the creation of the Common Core Standards Initiative and Race to the Top grants. Increased accountability where schools, teachers, and administrators are held accountable for student learning.